if you need any, because Caroline will be there and she will be able to give you some advice or perhaps solve your problem. As I say, so today is quite a complicated subject. What can we claim or what can't we claim when it comes to allergens and food hypersensitivity? Not as simple as it first appears when it comes to describing your product, if you're a manufacturer or a retailer, or it can be even more complicated in hospitality. So today's webinar is trying to kind of demystify that so that you'll understand what your roles are. And I see we have a lot of regulators here, so not just people from the hospitality sector and industry, a lot of regulators, and for regulators, it presents some challenges as well. So great to see you here as well. So we couldn't do this setup unless we had a sponsors. Can I give a shout out to our sponsor, please? Without them, we couldn't do these type of events. So I'd like to thank Audit It Has. And they are an allergy and ingredient app that helps independent chain businesses reach customers with restrictive diets. So you can celebrate your menu with confidence. And I think even as a regulator, as I see some of you out there, I think it's a great opportunity to go on the app and to see what people are doing in industry and see how they're tackling this really complicated problem. So a big thank you to them. As we know, this is a very hot subject. 35% of people eating out now have a restrictive diet. And it's growing, that number as well. 2 million people in the UK suffer from one or more food allergies or hypersensitivities. 3.5 million people have already turned to non-meat diets. So this is a moving feast. It is a mega trend. Can I will ask you to mute your microphones? I think someone's got their microphone on, and sorry, could the person with their microphone on please mute it? Or Caroline, can you mute their microphone? Well, look, this is an interactive webinar. And so what we're going to do is run a couple of polls because we have got quite a large audience. You're statistically significant and you're a well-informed audience as well. So your views will count for something and will inform your colleagues about what you think on this subject. So before I introduce Georgina, can we run the first poll, please, Caroline? And it'll come up on your screen. And then could you vote for one of these? What do you think the term free from means on a food label? It means that the product is free from ingredients commonly associated with allergens or intolerance. It can legally be used without listing the specific allergen as long as the product is safe. It's a general health claim and doesn't necessarily refer to allergens. It refers to a product category used for items free from certain allergens, or none of the above. So if you'd be so kind as to click on this, and others will say, Georgina will interpret our answers and give us the correct question. Okay, I think we've almost completed that. Super. So we've got 80% participation. If the others, if you don't know, just put down don't know. That is a valid answer. The whole idea is for us to share information so we're all better informed. Right, as we're coming to the end of that poll, let me move on to Georgina, who we're very lucky to have with us today, who's going to demystify some of the issues that we have around allergen labeling. Georgina is well known as a nutrition and regulatory advisor. Many of you have probably worked with her over the decades. She's got a lot of experience in food compliance and free from labeling, so a great source for information. And she's the founder of the Nutrient Gap. She specializes in helping food businesses navigate the labeling regulations, which, as I say, are very, very, very complicated until someone makes them simple for you. And so, Georgina, I'm looking forward to your presentation about how do we make this complicated subject simple, and what are the things that we should all look out for? So over to you, Georgina.
Thanks very much, Sterling. Hello, everybody. I'm Georgina, and I'm the founder of the Nutrient Gap, and I'm a consultancy dedicated in helping food businesses navigate that complex world of food labelling, compliance, and regulations. So in this session, we'll be covering some key points around food labelling with a focus on free-from products and allergen declarations and what needs to be included on labels, whether the food is sold loose, pre-packed or pre-packed for direct sale. We'll also touch on the rules around allergen claims, the issue of secret recipes, and highlight a few examples of where things have gone wrong. It's just a brief overview, just to give you the essentials and a few talking points to take away. So why does labelling matter? When we think of labelling, we often focus on the legal side, making sure what's on the pack ticks all the right boxes. But it's so much more than that. It's about clear, accurate labelling, which builds trust. It shows the business is transparent. It shows that they know what they're doing and takes food safety seriously. And for people with allergies or dietary needs, the label can be a lifeline. And compliance isn't just for manufacturers and big retailers. It's also just as important for small producers and even that local WI cake stall. And for regulators, it's about knowing how to enforce and advise with confidence. And for businesses, it's about knowing the difference between what's required and what's best practice. So whatever the setting, packed, loose or served, the responsibility is exactly the same. We'll just touch now on the legal framework, just a small slide about this. So firstly, Regulation 1169/2011. And this is the cornerstone of food labelling legislation in the UK, and it's called the Food Information to Consumers, or the FIC. Although it's an EU regulation, it's been retained by us law, by the UK law post-Brexit. And it sets out the fundamental requirements of what information must appear on food labels and how it must be presented. So that means things like minimum font size, allergen labelling, ingredient lists, nutrition, that kind of thing. So whether the food is loose or pre-packed, the FIC underpins almost everything we'll talk about today. And alongside the FIC, we also have the Food Safety Act. And this act is a key for enforcement, and its main goal is to protect public health in relation to food. It gives local authorities the power to act when food is unsafe or mislabeled, especially if it could mislead or harm the consumer. And while the laws themselves are vital, the real day-to-day work of interpreting and applying them often falls to guidance. With the FSA and DEFRA, they provide best practice and interpretations that help us navigate the regulations and those grey areas. And this guidance helps turn legal wording into clear, practical advice. So hopefully, we're all on the same page. So we have three categories of packaged foods, and I say that in inverted commas, the packaged foods. So first of all, we have pre-packed. And this is fully packaged and sealed food before being offered for sale. And these products require the mandatory labelling and are the most regulated products because the consumer can't ask questions at point of sale. Then we have loose food, and this is food sold without packaging at the point of sale. So when we talk about loose foods, we're referring to anything that isn't packaged when the consumer chooses it. So think things like salad bars, deli items, or food served in a restaurant. And these products are often served and sold with a much more flexible way, but they're also not exempt from allergen information. And lastly, pre-packed for direct sale, or PPDS. This often catches people out, and it refers to food that's made and packed by a business and then sold to the consumer on the same premises. So that's just a very quick overview of the categories of packaged foods. And now we'll go over to the labelling side, and we'll take a closer look at first of all at this pre-packed food label. There are some mandatory things missing on this label. I'm sure you'll catch me out and ask questions later, but I'm just going over a few of the mandatory ones here that are shown. So first of all, every pre-packed food must have a legal name. And this can be a customary name like a Bakewell tart, or it can be a straightforward description that tells people what the product is. I'll just get my little pointer out. So first of all, the product is called a chicken and vegetable broth, but the legal name is a soup made with vegetables, cooked with rice and pearl barley. Then you have got the ingredient list. And this must be in descending order of weight, showing the allergens, which need to be emphasised and preferably in bold. You'll often see the quid. Okay. And this means quantitative ingredient declaration. And this is where we give a percentage of the key ingredients. This helps to influence the consumer to buy the product, and also it's typically shown where it's mentioned in the product name or the legal name. There's also a durability date that needs to be present, either a use by or best before, and the net weight. And this needs to be in the same field of vision as the legal name itself. Storage instructions are required to inform the consumer on how to keep the product safe and in good condition. And most products also need a nutrition table. A name and address of the responsible food business is required for accountability. And depending on the product, you might also need to show the instructions of use, alcohol content, and also the country of origin. Okay, so what about loose foods? What are the labelling regulations around loose foods? So just because there's no physical label on these products, it doesn't mean there's no obligation. And when selling loose foods or serving foods in restaurants, allergen information still needs to be available. The law allows allergen information for loose foods to be provided in writing, such as a sign, an allergen matrix, or verbally. But whichever route is used, the information must be consistent. So if a business chooses to give allergen information verbally, every single member of staff who serves that food must be confident and accurate in what they say. There should also be a printed backup version that staff can refer to, so the information remains consistent and reliable. And lastly, the labelling for pre-packed for direct sale, which comes under the Natasha's law. This is where we see a label on the product with the name of the food, which is this here, and a full ingredient list with allergens highlighted and preferably in bold. And the key thing to understand is that pre-packed for direct sale refers specifically to food that's packed by the business on the same premises where it's being sold. It doesn't apply to made-to-order food or non-pre-packed or loose foods. This is one of the areas where we see the most errors, and businesses don't often realise that their food falls into this category, or they struggle to get the labelling right. So as per the regulation 1169/2001, there's 14 regulated allergens, and I must stress the word regulated, and we'll come on to that with the poll later. These must be declared by law whether the product is loose, pre-packed or pre-packed for direct sale. These include the common ones like milk, egg and nuts, but also the less obvious ones like lupin and sulfites. Allergens must be listed in the ingredients and emphasised in a way and usually in bold type. So, for example, here we have the allergen wheat, which is highlighted under the wheat flour. The allergen here for the salmon is fish. So we don't highlight salmon, we actually name the allergen, which is fish, in brackets in bold by the side. And then we also have the hidden allergen, which I always talk about, things like tahini and miso. Tahini made all up of sesame, miso of soya. So we name the allergen by the side of this hidden ingredient allergen there. We also need an allergy advice statement, and this should go underneath the ingredient list. It's really important to say that an allergen statement should only be present if allergens are actually present in the ingredients. And these statements are there to guide the consumer, and it simply tells them to check the ingredient list for any allergens. And there's two standard versions. Firstly, the basic one, and then secondly, the one when gluten-containing cereals are used within the ingredients. And some products don't have an ingredient list at all, like alcoholic drinks. But if there's an allergen in there, it still needs to be declared. And that's when you see a simple line like contains sulfites. So anything that says contains should actually only be on a product that is exempt from an ingredient list. And finally, the voluntary may contain statement can be used only if there's a genuine cross-contamination risk. And this statement must be justified by a proper risk assessment, not just as a default, and needs to reflect the actual risk and controls the food business has in place. We often see a lot of people put that blanket statement contains X, Y, Z, and they always also put lupin in, which is a very rare allergen, which does make me giggle. Anyway, we'll go back on to now non-regulated allergens. There's another really important area that's getting increasing attention, and that's the issue of non-regulated allergens. And these are ingredients that aren't part of the legal list of 14, but can still cause serious reactions. So things like strawberries, tomatoes, citrus fruits, kiwi, and legumes, a bit like peas and chickpeas. They don't need to be highlighted in bold by law, but there's still a real risk for some people, especially in the food service setting where ingredients might not be obvious. And that's why there's a real push for full ingredient transparency. So if someone asks a server, does this contain strawberry, and the business doesn't know, then that's a real risk. So even though the law only covers the 14 allergens, it's good practice to have a full ingredient list available and make sure staff know what's in each dish. So free from, what does this actually mean? And I'm actually picking on the Sainsbury's brand at the moment because I'm doing a bit of work with them on this section. So there is a common misconception that the claim free from means the product is free from all allergens. But basically that's not the case. If a product carries a free from claim, it must be specific. It should show you what it's actually free from. So for example, free from gluten, you can see underneath here, free from milk, free from egg. The wording should appear clearly on front of pack because consumers in the free from market often rely heavily on that front of pack claim when making the purchasing decisions. And this is exactly why clear and accurate labelling matters so much. Because free from claim isn't just a selling point, it's also a commitment of safety. So when you're making a free from claim, it has to be clear, accurate, and backed up with solid evidence. You need to prove it's completely absent, not just removed from the recipe. Out of the 14 regulated allergens, only 2 currently have established legal thresholds. The legal threshold, first of all, for gluten-free is less than 20 parts per million of the final product. And this even applies to gluten-free ingredients such as gluten-free wheat starch or gluten-free oats. And I know Adrian will talk about the technical aspect and side of oats shortly. But the key points to remember are you can use a gluten-free claim on your product if the final product is tested at less than 20 parts per million of gluten and you have evidence if challenged. You can't say a product is gluten-free and also add a may contain gluten statement because that's a clear contradiction and it basically breaks the rules. And lastly, a lot of people do tend to put gluten-free on anything just as a marketing tool. And you can't put a gluten-free as a marketing tool on products that are naturally gluten-free, a bit like this apple or this bottle of water. And trust me, I've seen it. The claim is only allowed when there's a genuine risk of gluten and proper controls are in place. And you've actually changed that recipe to make it gluten-free. So if a soup has flour in it to thicken it, it's not suitable and you can't say gluten-free. But if you've changed that recipe to corn flour, then you can say gluten-free if it's tested at less than 20 parts per million. So just like gluten, sulfites also have a regulated threshold. You'll also often see sulfites in things like wine, things in dried fruit and soft drinks, and they act as processing aids or additives. So if there's more than 10 parts per million in the final product, they must be declared and clearly highlighted on the label. And we also need to be cautious of broad terms, which things like allergen friendly and allergen free. So unless you can guarantee the total absence of all 14 regulated allergens, these terms are not appropriate. And one thing I see all the time is products labelled as allergen free, but made with gluten-free oats. And even if they're gluten-free oats, they're still a regulated allergen, so they must still be declared in bold. But not all allergy claims are obvious. Some are implied through wording, symbols, or even branding. And these count as implied allergy claims, and they still need to follow the rules. For example, branding a product as lunchbox friendly or using the term no nasties. We've got lunchbox friendly here, no hidden nasties. And these terms often suggest the product is safe for people with allergies, but misleading as it doesn't state which allergy. There's also no current legal definition for made without gluten. And this means it's not a recognised or regulated claim, like gluten-free, which has a clear legal threshold. You'll also see some products that say made without milk or made without dairy. And again, people need to specify what it's made without. So even if the business means we don't add that ingredient, a consumer might reasonably interpret it as a guarantee of absence. We also often see third-party allergen symbols, like the crossed out peanut or similar icons. But unless they're from an official certifying body, they aren't regulated. And this means there's no set of rules about how they're used or what they mean or who's approving them. These icons might look helpful, but they can be misleading. They might suggest there's a level of allergen control in place when actually there may be not. So even if you're not making a formal free-from claim, you can still breach the rules in your branding, packaging, or your marketing implied ones. So the key thing to remember is if a consumer could reasonably believe a product is free from a certain allergen, then that message must be clear, accurate, and properly backed up, just like you would do with a formal free-from claim. So let's clear up the confusion between vegan and allergens. A product can be labelled vegan if it doesn't intentionally contain animal ingredients. A product can be labelled vegan if it might have a may contain milk or egg warning due to cross-contamination. This is not a contradiction, it just shows there's a possible allergen risk. Most vegans are fine with that. I'm vegan, I'm fine with that. But for someone with a milk or egg allergy, even tiny traces can be dangerous. So unless the label says milk-free or egg-free, you can't assume a vegan product is safe for someone with a milk or egg allergy. So the next few slides, we're going to show what can happen when allergen labelling goes wrong. So firstly, in this case, we're looking at Tesco. They recently had a recall for 2 free-from meal kits because soya was in the product but not listed on the label. But what makes it worse is that these were sold under the free-from banner. which would normally make allergy sufferers think the product was safe. That completely undermines the purpose of the range. This is a clear reminder of how important it is to have strong checks in place at every stage, whether it's a recipe change or a new supplier or a packaging update. Every time there's a change, the allergens and ingredients need to be properly reviewed again, right through to the final sign-off. Next, I think we possibly all remembered, I think it was last year actually, the peanut contamination in mustard. And it was very complex and where it goes to allergen incidents, and certainly what we've seen in recent years, very complex. It triggered 17 separate FSA alerts as the situation developed and affected a wide range of products. But one standout moment for me was how quickly my team responded. So pat on the back for my team there, because within 30 minutes of the first alert, we'd already notified our clients and shared clear signage for our takeaway operators. So this is why it's so important to keep on top of the FSA allergen alerts, because things can change really fast and the consequences can be really huge. And these alerts really should be part of everyone's food safety and compliance routines. So whether you're in enforcement or food production or advising the industry, these alerts need to be checked in real time, checked for relevance and action straight away if needed. And lastly, this recall is a great reminder that allergen compliance isn't just about what is listed, it's about how it's listed. So in early 2023, Aldi recalled multiple varieties of their Harvest Morn high protein bars. Allergens were present in the ingredient list, therefore the product was formulated correctly. However, the allergens were not correctly emphasised, which made the label non-compliant. If an allergen isn't clearly highlighted, it can be missed. We know that when we're very busy, when we're shopping around and rushing around. So this is a great example of how something as simple as bold, as simple as a bold font can trigger a major product recall. So it's also a good reminder to check that not just the wording, but also the presentation before you sign off a label. So lastly, I'll be going over secret recipes and ingredient disclosure. And this is something I see a lot with small producers, market traders, artisan businesses, especially those who make their own spice mixes or marinades. These blends are often what make their product special. And of course, I know they want to protect their recipes. They want to protect their ratios and their techniques from being copied. And to be fair, that's absolutely fine. You can keep that part confidential. But when it comes to ingredients and labelling, the rules are really clear. You must declare all ingredients used in the final product. And any of the 14 regulated allergens must be clearly highlighted, even if they're only present in small amounts. So if it's a non-pre-packed food or a meal served in a restaurant, you still have to provide the allergen information and it must be available verbally. Now for spice mixes or herb blends, you can just say spices or herbs only if they make up less than 2% of the product and there are no allergens in that mix. But if your blend contains things like mustard or celery seed, you can't just say spices. The allergen must be named and clearly declared. So yes, you can protect your recipe, but when it comes to ingredients and allergens, there's no hiding. Basically, we all have, and consumers have, the right to know what's in their food, and we've all got a legal duty and a moral duty to be transparent. And that's it for me today. Thank you.
Well, Georgina, thank you very much. Sorry, I was so engrossed I forgot to reappear. That was absolutely fantastic. I think a real masterclass in allergen labeling. If you weren't clear about allergen labeling before, hopefully you're a lot clearer now. That is a complex subject put into simple, practical terms. So I always love it when it's very practical rather than steers towards the kind of more ethereal academic. So thank you very much, Georgina. Georgina's going to be round after Adrian's talk and we'll be able to take your questions. Just a reminder, there's a chat box down here. If you can put your questions in there, and Georgina and Adrian will do their very best to answer it. So if I could ask Adrian to appear on the screen.
I'm just going to firstly talk about our sponsor.
I do apologise. Please do so.
No problem. So just one quick slide about our sponsor today. So I know Sterling's already thanked And It Has for supporting this session. I've been supporting And It Has for several years now across a range of projects. And over the time, I've really seen how valuable the platform has become to food businesses. It's helped companies save time, improve accuracy, and reduce the risk of errors. So instead of relying on spreadsheets and that big blue folder, or even staff memory, believe me, my memory is really bad at the moment, teams can instantly access up-to-date project and menu information all in one place. But what I really love is how the app supports consumers too. People can simply just scan a QR code in the restaurant or even check the information before they go out, which is a huge help for anyone needing to plan around dietary needs. And even better, there is also a filter tool within the app, so customers can easily search for dishes based on what they can eat, not what they can't eat. And this gives people a real confidence in what they're choosing. And it's such an important part of creating safe, inclusive food service. Where the app really comes into its own is where the non-regulated allergens are coming into its own, because the full ingredients are displayed clearly, and it means even those who react to those ingredients that aren't the top 14 allergens can make those informed decisions. It's also user-friendly, and actually my father-in-law can use it, and he's 94, so that's really good. So for me, And It Has isn't just a clever bit of tech, it's just a practical, accessible way to embed transparency and safety into everyday service. And I'm really pleased that And It Has been able to sponsor us today, and for me to tell you a little bit about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Georgina. A well worth app well worth going to. Georgina, I believe you're going to run the poll just before I introduce Adrian. Is that correct?
No, I think it's Caroline.
Oh, Caroline, can you launch the poll just as I talk about Adrian? There is another poll question for you to answer. And this poll question relates to oats, and they need to be highlighted on an ingredients list because, one, they are an allergen. Two, they are an issue for those with celiac disease. Three, they are at a risk of contamination with other grains. And four, all of the above. So could I please ask you to enter your views on that? And we'll come back to it at the end of Adrian's presentation. While we're waiting for the answer, let me talk a bit about Adrian Rogers. We're very lucky to have him with us. He's a development manager at BioCheck. I'm sure that we've all heard of BioCheck, one of the big analytical companies that are out there. And he's a specialist in diagnostic test kits with a background in microbiology and over 25 years of experience in immunoassay development. So look, Adrian has got years of extensive experience, global extensive experience. He's off to Australia next week, I think, to even hear what's going on that side of the world. And he's going to share all his knowledge with us about testing. If we can close the poll, please, Caroline. Great. And over to you, Adrian, then. I'm really looking forward to hearing what you're going to say from an analytical point of view. Adrian.
That's great. Well, firstly, thank you very much, Sterling, for the great introduction, and also thank you to Caroline for inviting me to talk on this subject. So I've titled it's the presentation Gluten Oats, How Do We Cope Analytically? And it did strike me as sort of having to cope. I thought when Caroline suggested I talk about this, I thought, oh, I knew all there was about oats and gluten. And then I started looking into it. And even I found a few things I didn't quite realize. So I'm hoping I can try and sort of navigate my way through this process and help people understand, as I've now learned to understand, the issues that can be involved when trying to decipher, what does oats mean, what does gluten mean. So to start with, I thought we'll start with a definition of exactly what is an oat. So, oops. So what is gluten? So I'm going to take the Codex Alimentarius definition of gluten, and of Codex Alimentarius, that actually is Latin for food code. So it's a set of standardized references for food production across the world, and it's run by the WHO and FAO. So back in 1979, they produced what they call the Standard for Foods for Special Dietary Use for Persons Intolerant to Gluten. And in that code, they set a definition of gluten, and I'll read it here. Gluten, for the purpose of this standard, gluten, is defined as a protein fraction from wheat, rye, barley, or oats, or their crossbred varieties and derivatives thereof, to which some persons are intolerant, and that is insoluble in water at 0.5 molar NaCl. Basically, if you wash, for example, wheat flour with salt water, what you have left at the end of that is gluten. But you can see there's a caveat here. So it says, with the exception of oats. So oats can be tolerated by most, but not all people who are intolerant to gluten. Therefore, the allowance of oats that are not contaminated with wheat, rye, or barley in foods covered by this statement may be determined at a national level. And that's where things get a little bit interesting. And I'll come back to that later. So not all countries in the world treat gluten the same way and have the same regulations with regards to gluten. And that can cause a bit of confusion, as you can imagine, especially if you're going on holiday and what you think has gluten in may have a different definition depending on the country you're in. So just to drill down a bit more with regards to a bit, explaining a bit more about gluten. Well, at the end of the day, gluten is a generic term for a storage protein of a cereal. So you can see here that there's lots of different proteins within a cereal grain, and they all have different functions. So you've got metabolic proteins, you've got some structural proteins, and then what we define as gluten is actually the storage proteins of these grains. So they're the bit in a seed that gives the seed the energy to grow. And each different cereal grain has a different type of gluten, if you like. So what we know as so wheat has these proteins called gliadins and glutenins. Rye has seclins, barley has hordanes, and oats has avenins. And those are and you can see that there's a bit of a question mark regards to oats. So I'll come back to that. And then you have other grains that are traditionally safe for people with celiac disease or gluten-free. So like rice, maize, and sorghum. So there's a lot of text on this page, but I thought I'd sort of explain a bit more about why gluten-free oats are a bit of a special case. And I've taken this information from the Camden BRI website. So I'll read it through because I think it's a really good, concise piece of information that Camden have put on there. So oats do not inherently contain gluten, although they do contain similar proteins called avenins that can trigger celiac disease in a small proportion of people, as well as oat proteins that can cause food allergic reactions. So the bigger issue with oats causing reactions is their cross contact in the supply chain with other cereals that do contain gluten, like wheat, rye, barley, and their hybridized strains. Special requirements are laid down for gluten-free oats. So there's a European regulation in that they must have specifically produced, prepared, and or processed in a way to avoid contamination by wheat, rye, barley, or their crossbred varieties, and gluten content of such oats cannot exceed 20 mg per kg. Now, you've heard of 20, just to clear this up a bit, you've heard of 20 ppm. Well, 20 ppm and 20 mg per kg are equivalent, but I'm a scientist. I tend to use mg per kg because it's traceable to the SI unit, so standardization. So ppm's a ratio of something in something, and saying it's mg per kg is a bit more descriptive. It's milligrams per kilogram. And it should be remembered, however, that oats themselves are required to be emphasized as allergens in accordance with the FIC, as we heard Georgina mention about earlier, even if they are gluten-free. This is because the level of 20 mg mg of gluten per kilogram of food is for protection of those with celiac disease and not those with food allergy. Now, we see Georgina showed some labels earlier, and I just want to show this as an example now. This is actually labeled up correctly. So my colleague at work, Richard, these are his favorite biscuits. But they gave me a bit of a headache when I was reading it, and they said it could be my interpretation of the label. But you can see on the left-hand side, we can see that it's a wheat-free recipe. They're an oat cake. It's a wheat-free recipe, and we can see that the oats are correctly labeled up on the right-hand side here, bolded. But when it comes to the voluntary advice, this is where I get a bit confused. So we say that's fine. But so the factory is nut-free, and the recipe is actually wheat-free and nut-free. But then they can't make a guarantee that their ingredients are wheat-free and nut-free. So as you know, if luckily I don't suffer from celiac disease, but that would confuse me, I think, seeing that. So they didn't use wheat in the recipe, but they can't guarantee there's wheat not in there. So, I mean, you have to make your own choice then. Do you eat that or not? So that's why I think there's a need for further standardization and further information to help clarify these voluntary uh, uh, voluntary labeling issues. So apologies, my cat's opened the door behind me. Okay, so just a way of clarifying this, what this is taken from Alex Gazzola's blog site. Now, Alex is a journalist with 20 odd years of experience of writing about food intolerance and food allergy and celiac disease. And I took this wholesale off his blog site just because I found it a good analogy and a good way to think about this issue. So he says that we're all human beings, members of bipedal two-legged mammalian species. So, but a human being who loses a leg in an accident would still be a human being and still be a member of the same species. So this is the same with cereals containing gluten, which have had their gluten removed. Or in the case of oats, protected from gluten cross-contamination, they're still cereals containing gluten as defined by law. They've just lost their gluten. So there's some other examples there. So I'll just mentioned about the next two as well, because they're relevant for those with celiac disease. So gluten-free wheat starch is still an allergen and must be emphasized on labels. It's an allergen which has lost its gluten because it hasn't got the non-starchy wheat components in. And also a thing that comes up time and time again about gluten-free beer. So deglutenized barley, for instance. So in gluten-free beer, it must still be declared as an allergen. Its gluten has merely been lost. So with these beers, they use specific enzymes to degrade the gluten from the barley in there. So that's why you're drinking a gluten-free beer, but it's still labeled up as containing barley. Now, going back to this, the information about gluten levels around the world. So we're in, can't say we're in Europe anymore, but we're still carried over lots of the European legislation. And in Europe and the UK, we have a legal limit for gluten content in food. And in Europe and the UK, we class oats as being naturally gluten pure oats, so uncontaminated oats as being natural gluten-free. And that's the same in the US and the same in China. But it's not the case all over the world. So in the case of Argentina, now they recently changed their legislation back in 2023. Prior to 2023, you couldn't have any food make a gluten-free claim if it contained any form of rye, barley, wheat, or oats. From 2023, they've now put a legal limit in, and that legal limit is 10 mg per kg of gluten, not 20 mg per kg gluten like the rest of the world. So they've got a lower level. And also, the food can contain oats as long as the oats have had their gluten removed. So similar to like with the gluten-free beer they used enzymes to get rid of the gluten in the beer, then you can do that in Argentina if you remove the gluten from oats. Now, the other country that has completely different rules is Australia and New Zealand. They don't have a limit for gluten. They have a non-detect statement. So as long as you run your tests and you can't detect it, then you can say it's gluten-free. But they class oats as containing gluten. In Australia, there's no such thing as a gluten-free oat. They see oats as containing gluten. And this goes back to your Codex recommendation where oats are dealt with at a national level. So turning attention now to sort of what I spend my day job doing, which is developing test methods for, and in this case, test methods of gluten. So you can see we have an array of tools available for detecting gluten in food. If you look at the diagram, I tend to do with the methods to the left of the ELISA. So I develop ELISAs, we develop lateral flows, and another on-site test, which is a flow-through test. But there's also some sort of more high-end things, PCR, mass spectrometry, and coming in now is sort of next-generation sequencing. So a lot of the time, these are used for confirmation of testing. You know, if something's been picked up in the lab, they'll often be sent off for confirmation to check whether there really is, in this case, gluten in there. So this is sort of just saying a bit more about ELISA. ELISA tends to be seen as the gold standard for gluten and allergy analysis in the laboratory. So it's just to show you there what a kit looks like. It's a lot of bottles and jars, really, for use in a laboratory. You've got some buffers for washing, some buffers for extracting the sample. You've got a set of calibrators, so you can measure an unknown amount in your sample off a standard, some standardized gluten fractions that you can measure. And this is my antibody on the right-hand side here. So this is what is on the surface of those little microtiter plates, obviously a lot more reduced. And these are biological recognition molecules, really. If they see gluten in your sample, they attach themselves to it. And then by adding labels in, we can then visualize if there's gluten present in the food. I don't want to get bogged down in too many technicalities. This is just to show the progress over the last 40 odd plus years of developing test methods for gluten analysis. So there's been all these names, these numbers. They're all different types of antibody, and quite often they're called monoclonal antibodies. So they're very specific about detecting gluten. I mean, it traced back one of the first antibodies was back in the 80s, which was a Skerrit antibody. Now, it wasn't designed to look for gluten specifically. It was designed to look at the quality of gluten. So it was used as a quality control test to see whether the levels of gluten, because the levels of gluten will vary depending on the cultivar of the wheat or the growing conditions, etc. So that's how it originally came about. And then people suddenly realized, well, we can take that antibody and we can put it in a sensitive test, and we can test the food to see whether it really is gluten-free or not. So that's how it all started. And over the years, we made progress with different antibodies. And you can see back in 2008, the Codex standard I talked about earlier was revised. And so up until 2025, where you can see there's a few different antibodies there, all competing for people's attention to use in their test kits. So going back to this Codex standard, there's a few more details about how you test for gluten. So it says that the general outline of the methods there, the quantitative determination of gluten in foods and ingredients shall be based on immunologic methods. So this is like the ELISA, lateral flow, that I talked about earlier, or methods providing they're at least equal, sensitive, and specific. So there's been great progress made with mass spectrometry methods, and now they are getting as reliable and as sensitive as ELISA-based methods. The antibody used should react with cereal protein fractions that are toxic for persons intolerant to gluten, and should not cross-react with other cereal proteins or other constitutes of the food ingredient. And the methods used for determination will be validated and calibrated against a certified reference material if available. So actually in Codex, there is an analytical method that's mentioned, which is the R5 Mendez method at ELISA. And that's classed as a type 1 type method. So that's what Codex recommend for use for measuring gluten in foods. So I'm just going to sort of briefly go over some of the issues we have with trying to look for gluten in foods. So gluten is a catch-all term for a number of different proteins. In fact, over 100 plus proteins would be classed as incorporated into gluten. And you get variability between rye and barley and wheat, but also, as I said before, the growing conditions, different parts of the world will have different wheat grains will have different levels of wheat gluten in there, and also when you cook a food, you change the structure of the protein. So cooked food is often a bit more difficult to detect with these methods because quite often you raise your antibodies against the native food. Once you cook it, the proteins change. It's like when you cook an egg, you can see before your eyes the white of the egg changes color, and that is the structure of the proteins actually changing. So looking at sort of celiac disease, and what I've got there is NCGS. There's non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So it's people who fall into this category. They don't have celiac disease, they don't have an allergy, but they're still intolerant. They're still sensitive to gluten in foods. And different people react to different proteins. Again, there's no catch-all, and they have variable sensitivities. Different levels of sensitivity. Each individual is different. And when we look at the method selection, so we've got to look at when we're raising these antibodies. Like I said before, the monoclonals are very specific about what they target. So we try and design them to look at specific parts of a protein. And one of the big issues is actually getting, you've got a gluten-free chocolate muffin in front of you. Well, how do I, process that to then run a method? So we use extraction, then we use these denaturing, reducing agents a lot of the time to try and get as much gluten out of a food as possible. But chocolate is a pain in the bum, excuse my language, just because it's got all these other things in there, like polyphenols, that actually can interfere with your test. So it's important to try and tailor your extraction to get as much of the protein out as you can. Now, there are specific challenges involved with actually measuring gluten in oats. And the biggest issue, I don't know if you can see here, and this is why there was a set of standards developed to look into this, because remember I said we're looking at a level of 20 mg per kg, but that's in this test, in this method, you can see here that they've created some known spike levels of oats. So they spiked oats with known levels of barley and rye and wheat. We can see the wheat with this assay. There's 20 mg per kg as spike, and it's reading off about 20 mg per kg. But with things like barley and rye, the barley was spiked in at a level of 20 mg per kg, but it's reading off higher. So the antibodies involved don't detect wheat, barley, and rye in the same way. And this can cause headaches. If you've got this legislative position of 20 ppm, you've got 10 mg per kg of barley in there, but it's actually reading off your assay as higher. So where do you go with that? How do you label that as gluten-free? So this is why this set of standards was developed through the AOAC, and they put these specific method requirements for people developing these tests to try and negate this issue of over recovery with some tests. And they made this material available for sale. So as a method developer, I can go on a website and I can get this material, which is oats spiked with known amounts of rye, barley, and wheat, to help me design these tests. And this was just looking back at this a bit more. This was a paper put together by the University of Manchester a couple of years ago, where they've taken the different commercially available ELISAs, and they've run the kit calibrators against known barley calibrators, and you can just decide that you can see the differences. Some kits are equal, so 20 mg per kg of gluten would be the same as 20 mg per kg rye, same with Moronga kit. But with things like the R5 and the G12, you're getting this over recovery. So it's important to know about these issues if you're using a lab to measure your gluten content of the oats, etc. Okay, I might skip through this as I realize I'm going a little bit over time. I can see Sterling's popped up. So there was a thing on LinkedIn, a question when Caroline advertised about this meeting about the WHO FAO threshold levels. Well, what I will say is that what was published actually targets wheat because it's from the allergen side, so it doesn't include gluten. And also the statement in there about oats, it says that IgE-mediated food allergy risk identified for oats stem from cross-contact with other grains in oats rather than the oats themselves. So that was just a quick clearing that side up from these recently published guidelines. And just to say about gluten then, there has been another call for experts that closed the end of last month where they would specifically look at gluten. Okay, and just my final slide, just quickly, I just wanted to point this out about this is taken from Gluten Free Watchdog, which is a subscription-based service out in the US. And what Tricia Thompson, who runs it, has been doing for many years is taking samples that her subscribers have recommended and testing them. So she's been testing oats for years, and she's sort of retrospectively put this together, and she can identify sort of patterns. So you can see in the US and the gluten-free rules took effect. The arrival of mechanically sorted oats, because in the US and other parts you can actually use machinery to take the errant grains out, so the barley and the rye out of the oats as well. But what I want to point out is that the incidence of contamination of oats went up hugely during a drought back in 2021 in the US. So, and it was the worst oat harvest for 150 years. So the quality of the oats available went down, and there was more errant grains in there. So I mean, we hear about global warming. This is something we need to start looking out from. As our harvests go down, the quality of that harvest will go down as well, and there's possibly more risk for people who suffer from celiac disease. Okay, thank you very much. I'll finish there. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Adrian. I'd say that was a forensic, analytical look at gluten. Well done. Certainly, I learned a few extra things there, so much appreciated. Guys, we're coming towards the end of the session. We slightly overrun, but if you would please bear with us, I think I still would like to get the answers to those polls and for an interpretation from both Georgina and Adrian. And then there's just a couple of really good questions I don't think we can leave without getting answered. So, Caroline, can we have the answer from the first poll, please? And maybe, Georgina, you'd like to just comment on the answer and what you think about it. And then when we've done that, so Georgina, do you want to make a comment on the results of that poll? Do they surprise you? What does it tell you?
Yeah, actually. So basically, if you had said none of the above, you would be absolutely right. And just to sort of break down the actual the different ones that people have pointed out. So first of all, it means the product is free from ingredients commonly associated with allergies or intolerances. So it sounds common sense, it's absolutely right, but there's no definition, well, legal definition for commonly associated. They're regulated allergens, and the claim must also be specific to the name of the allergen. So free from on its own is not actually the right definition. Secondly, no one's chosen that, well done. Third, it's a general health claim and doesn't necessarily refer to allergens. Well, free from is not a health claim, it's a regulated statement that refers to a specific allergen again. So it's all down to that specific allergen. So it's not a health claim, it's actually a regulated claim. The next one is a bit of a grey area, and it sounds right, but so it refers to the product category used for items free from certain allergens. But that's true in retail, sort of the retail layout, but legally on pack, the use must still follow the allergen labelling laws and specify exactly what is absent. So using free from on its own doesn't actually mean it's free from anything unless you specify what it's free from. There we go.
Well, thank you very much, Georgina. And I'm sure that after people have seen the presentation, they'll be probably answer those questions in a different way. I certainly would. So it shows you that we all need help in clarification. Thank you, Georgina. Can we put up the next poll, please, and ask Adrian to perhaps comment on some of the results, Caroline?
Hi there. Yeah, I think just to go through, the answer was all of the above. It was everything that was listed there. They are an allergen. They're an issue for those with celiac disease, and they are risk of contamination with other grains. So it's quite a simple, and the majority of people on the poll actually got that correct. So it's to, and I hope during the presentation, I didn't waffle too much, and there is an understanding now of why they need to be labelled, and it is because of all those three points. So a nice, simple, concise answer from me for a change.
Thank you, Adrian. Look, there are lots of really interesting questions. Can I just ask you one? I know that we are overrunning a bit, which is from Alice, which I think is quite interesting. So Alice says, given how complex and dynamic food labeling regulations can be, especially in the free-from market, how do you see technology playing a role in helping food businesses ensure consistent and compliant labeling? What a terrific question, Alice. So how do you see technology playing a role now, or a greater role? Perhaps first you, Georgina?
Yeah, definitely. I think that we need to be, as I said all along in the presentation, completely transparent. And this is where this kind of technology is helping hospitality industry. You know, there is talk about Owen's Law, which will give the full ingredients when it comes to the hospitality industry. So having this kind of technology is I don't think it should be a luxury anymore. I think it should be part of the mainstream. So yeah, definitely. I think that.
Any comment from you on that, Adrian?
Just to say, I think what we're doing on sort of the analytical side is not to treat a result in isolation, and it's to build on. It's starting to look at trends. So I mean, with the whole use of AI, it's the buzzword at the moment, but you can start to build up, and it might get to the point where if you've got a testing regime in your factory, you might actually start to predict where you have issues of allergen contamination or gluten contamination in your product. There's certain hotspots, and you might actually be able to sort of predict where those issues might come from before they actually happen, and that will help everyone be more confident with the food they eat.
And Adrian, you mentioned AI, and I wonder if AI, artificial intelligence, and the Internet of Things will put the power in the hands of the consumer. And that's a good segue question that we got here. How safe are personal food testing kits which allow diners to test the food? So there are some kits out now. Do you see that as a big solution to
No.
First of all, perhaps, George,
sorry.
Adrian?
Sorry, I have a very strong personal opinion about these things. I mean, there is some aspect that the food you are receiving from the producer should be safe to eat.
Yeah.
So the emphasis really should be on the producer or who gives you the food to make sure it's safe to eat. The issues are many and plentiful with regards to personal devices. When we personally don't sell them as a company. We wouldn't sell to the members of the public. The testing devices we sell are used in conjunction with other control methods. So they're part of a big plan, allergen management plan, and they're a tool used as part of that plan. I mean, one of the big things I didn't really get a chance to look at properly, especially with contamination of oats, is it's not homogeneous. So it's not well mixed. So there are different grains in there. So you could take 100 samples of oats and only one of them has the grain in, yet the whole batch would have an issue. So if you're taking you've got a personal device and each one of the tests is say £5 a test, how many tests do you need to do to tell you that your whole plate of food is safe? that's sort of my issue. So it's more of the
I'd be
technologies that.
hungry by then.
What's that? Sorry.
I'd be hungry by
Well,
then.
this is it. This is it. So, and you'd look a bit odd if you take your liquidizer into the restaurant with you, blitz your whole meal, and then test it.
I
So,
can hear the passion coming out there,
yeah,
Adrian.
sorry, I'll gag myself a bit more.
Homogeneity of when you're taking any analysis is a massive issue. But
Yes.
Georgina, do you want to say a comment on
No,
that?
I basically concur with Adrian on that, definitely, because I just think it's impossible to do that. I really do. Yeah.
Okay, guys. So thank you once again. Look, we've got loads and loads of questions. We're not going to be able to get round them all in time. What we will do though is we will, if you guys are amenable, is to try to answer these questions, and we'll put it on Caroline's side, or we'll do some emails in LinkedIn so people can get their question answered, because we do want to get round to everyone. So as we come to the end, could I have the slide about our next webinar, please, Caroline? Again, I don't think you're going to get much better than that when it comes to allergen management. Two fantastic, insightful, practical presentations, and well done, Georgina. Well done, Adrian. We can see the passion and the knowledge coming out. That was really useful for me, let alone anybody else. Really got me thinking. Just to say that we have another webinar coming up on Friday, the 30th of May. It's at 2 o'clock. The first 40 tickets are free, and then Caroline is charging only £7 a ticket. I think the coffee that we'll be drinking might be more expensive than the actual webinar itself. You can start booking from tomorrow, so get in there early. And again, we're sticking to the theme on allergens, and we're looking at coffee shop allergen management, specifically coffee shop allergen management. And I'm sure that'll be fascinating. We have Alex Baker and Caroline as our speakers. I do hope you can join us then. Can I finally say thank you for joining us? Thank you for the great questions, great speakers, and I look forward to joining you at our next webinar. Any final words from you, Caroline?
I just want to say thank you to all of you. Thank you, Sterling, for hosting as ever. Amazing. And to Gina and Adrian for supporting us and talking about the labelling, which is something I know that both of you are very passionate about. And, you know, we just have to keep putting the message out there and trying to communicate as best we can all this information. So thank you everyone for joining. There will be an email sent out regarding feedback. If you could feedback the information, that'd be really appreciated. And hopefully we'll see you on the coffee shop allergy management, which hopefully you'll share with your colleagues. Thank you and goodbye. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Stay safe.